I call this debate to order. The resolution on the table tonight is resolved. Trust the science. And I am now looking for our first speech in the affirmative. Let's go to John Woolworth. John, you have 4 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am speaking in the affirmative and that we should trust the science. So, what do I mean by that? There are new scientific discoveries and new papers coming out all the time that claim to be based on science, and I don't trust every one of them. And trust, well, that should be earned. It's not something should be demanded of you. I have a computer science degree, but I don't call myself a science. But I trust science because it has methods and practices that allow me to verify the accuracy of the conclusions that I hear. So my trust is not blind. A few key points. Science doesn't claim 100% certainty. As we explore and test our assumptions and improve our measurements, we increase our certainty about what is probably true, but in a very real sense, anything is possible. And being open to what is possible is part of science. It can be frustrating how science seems to constantly change, but that doesn't change that I trust science. For me, I would rather that new information and reviews of previous studies result in new conclusions. And that tells me that they're looking at the data and are open to being questioned. Another key point, we don't need to separate our imagination from science. This idea of separating material and spiritual was born in the Enlightenment era, but that was before Einstein and quantum mechanics. And well, at a minimum, things have gotten more complicated in the last few hundred years. But what hasn't changed is our sense of wonder. Scientific methods have always recognized human limitations and were designed to work with them. Science is about being objective and looking at things objectively, but we don't need to lose our unique perspective or our own experience when we do that. When science is done well and communicated properly, it acknowledges that individuality. And we all have blind spots and we need each other because I can't get a full understanding of every claim being made or become an expert on every discipline there is. But I can learn how to evaluate the quality of the information being presented and the people who are presenting it. I can see if they're open to criticism or if they made an error, did they acknowledge it? I can check if they include their limits of their knowledge and their degree of certainty when making their conclusions. So that word science, it's not that old, but we've always been curious creatures and we've been trying to understand the world around us for a long, long time. The methods of science have formalized.
John, you've muted yourself. Did we just lose John?
Oh my goodness. I
There
don't know how I did that.
we Zoom.
All right. Did you get, so I was at the word science is not that old?
Yes, please.
Okay. So the methods of science have formalized our natural ability to reason and to channel our intuitions and our desire to make sense of everything. People created these methods, and we can all work together to refine and improve them. I think they were created with good intentions, and if we work together, we can continue to use science to help us flourish. Thank you.
Thank you to our speaker. I will now take questions of curiosity, not speeches, but questions of curiosity for our speaker. Please raise your Zoom hand if you would like to ask the speaker a question. Let's go to Joshua.
Yeah, hi. So Madam Chair, I'm wondering whether the speaker aforementioned, I'm wondering what he has to say about the constantly shifting nature of science and whether we can really call anything objectively true.
Excellent question to our speaker.
Yes, the constantly shifting nature is part of the method. It's that we are constantly questioning the thing we just learned. I think every thing we learn, we end with more questions. Um, so the other part, I'm sorry, what was that word you used again? Oh, can anything be truly objective? No, I mean, that's what I was saying about we are subjective. We are people who live in this world and we can't see it from the outside. So that's the degree of certainty and some of those other points. So thank you.
For one more question, let's go to Teresa.
Let me unmute myself, Madam Chair. I'm curious as to how the average normal person can evaluate scientific results with any kind of reliability.
Brief and beautiful question to our speaker.
Yes, and a great question. And I could not cover that in 4 minutes if I tried. And I have spent a lot of time studying that myself, and um, I have trouble with that myself. What I included was that we can look at who wrote the science and have they written something before and have they made a prediction maybe and that was proven true. Uh, some of it is a little bit of do they just feel like they're being honest? And yeah, that's the best I can do in a minute or so, Teresa.
We're going to go with just two questions for our opening speakers. So with that, our speaker and our questioners are thanked. And with that, we will move to our first speaker in the negative. For that, I am looking for Wendy Beard. Wendy?
Hello.
You've muted yourself, Wendy. Did we lose Wendy?
Okay, now can you hear me?
Yes, you have 4
All
minutes.
right. Okay. So I thought science is so broad. What kind of science? It's all kind. There's a lot of subjects within science. But anyway, because I'd like to say trust the science, but I'm speaking in the negative because I have so many examples where I don't trust the science. And so it depends, it depends on what it is. Some science I trust, some science I don't. I'm choosing to speak on the idea of macroevolution, which is that evolution happens between species, that there's common ancestors of almost everything, if not everything, not just within smaller groups, and the age of the earth. And so it's widely taught that the earth is billions of years old or millions, or I don't know what it exactly is. Anyway, it's a long time, and it's commonly taught that macroevolution theory is a fact. And I have studied a lot of examples that that's not the case. And in my public school, when I was growing up, we learned why it wasn't the case. We know none of our teachers believed in it either. And then over the years, I've collected more and more and more things happening because there's always new stuff coming out. Anyway, my first example is censorship of ancient history. Because the more I've learned about ancient history, the more I see ancient civilizations that were very advanced, very smart. They knew the constellations, they knew the calendar. There's even examples of them knowing the proper age of the earth as a globe, ancient maps, and now there's even some findings of ancient computers. And so I feel like that science wants us to believe that humans evolved from a common ancestor and therefore started out with low intelligence and then got smarter over time. And that's not what I see in history at all. I see the earliest humans were every bit as smart as we were, and probably more because they lived longer, so they had a lot more time to get smart. So I feel that there's all this historical evidence that's been censored in order to bias to teach what they want to teach rather than what's true. My second example is a censorship of many historians throughout history have documented their personal encounters with dragons, which have been renamed dinosaurs. And now there's this current teaching that they were extinct for millions of years, when that cannot be true, when you have historians that are widely believed on every other subject, like Marco Polo, Josephus. I don't remember all the long list of historians that have documented it. Encyclopedians of the 1500s have the living dragons at that time, besides whatever other animals they knew lived at that time. And it can't be denied that they lived through the 1500s, and there's isolated pictures of them in the early 1900s, like just a stray one here or there. Most of them were extinct by then. And so
Wendy,
that's another case of censoring history because you don't want it to be true. You want to teach something else. And then another example is findings of dinosaurs with flesh and blood on them, which prove that they can only be thousands or hundreds of years old. That any longer than that, that blood and flesh cannot be there. And another example is studying the Earth's rotation and revolution around the sun, and that over time the Earth is getting farther from the sun. So if it was millions of years old, it would have burnt up a lot longer ago when it was right next to the sun. So those are some more examples, and I have more, but if my time's up, it's up.
thank you to our speaker. And now we will take questions of curiosity for our speaker. For that, let's go to Jim. Jim, if you unmute, thank
Madam
you.
Chair,
Mhm.
Madam Chair, my daughter happens to be a geophysicist, and my father was a geologist, so I'm well acquainted with the methods of geology. And I'd like the speaker to explain how the core samples are repeatable, and the the data that they extract from those core samples can be used to locate oil reserves for our energy usage.
Okay, to our speaker.
I don't see where identifying where coal is has anything to do with how old the Earth is or not. So I believe that it can't be more than 6,000 years old because of multiple DNA studies, in addition to other things I've said. And I mean that they can find coal and oil. I mean, great. That doesn't have anything to do with what I'm saying.
And for one more question, let's go to Crystal.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to all who have spoken tonight and all those who will. The question I'm curious about is on what issues the speaker does trust the science. Making a statement, I would like to trust the science, but on what places does the speaker trust the science? Thank you.
Thought
Well, I
provoking.
trust the genetic studies, which by and large do show that, which I didn't get into, mutation rate going backwards to try to find a common ancestor in the 1990s. These people thought there was one, and they concluded that by taking known mutation rates from the last 4 generations and going back, that everything seems to have started in 4500 BC. So genetics is one thing that I would totally trust. And anything that's observable and repeatable and gets consistent results, I would trust. I just don't trust this one area because of proven censorship of history and science that invalidates that the earth can't be more than so many thousands of years old, and that there cannot be a common ancestor beyond a certain amount. I mean, certain animals are related, but beyond, like all cats might already be related, but they're always cats all the way back and to the first cat. And so that's what I believe, and that's what I think all the evidence says. So I think it's fake science, all the people that are saying otherwise.
And with that, our speaker and our questioners are thanked. And if you're new to us here, remember this is Jazz Hands. This is how on Zoom you can give applause to a speaker, including whether you agree or whether you simply respect. So, all right, let us go now back to the affirmative on resolved, trust the science. We are looking for Barbara. Barbara Watts. Do we have Barbara?
Yes, you have me. You can hear me.
4 minutes.
Okay, full disclosure, I am a scientist and I've been a scientist for 35, 40 years. I don't like to count up how long. I'm an oceanographer and I was drawn to oceanography because you get to work outside on boats. You get to bring beautiful sea creatures into your lab and work with them and understand them and actually maybe help them. Because I am involved daily in the process of science, it's easier for me than probably many of you to understand that some topics in science are more mature and provide more certain answers than others. And scientists acknowledge that. They acknowledge their uncertainty. So science is a process of collecting information about a question or a topic that we are trying to get answers to. The more time scientists have had to work on a topic, and the more scientists involved in reviewing the data, the more you can trust the science. So that could be a way you can look at it. Maybe a personal example will help. I wish more people got to know scientists. So one question that I was involved in answering had to do with big fish kills in this bay that you can see in the background here, in an estuary where I live. From the large body of work that we had from prior studies of this and other similar systems for the last 60 years or so, we understood the basics of how the ecosystem worked and went from small plants to large fish. And so we suspected that the source of the problem was the sewage treatment plant, which was adding chemicals which overstimulated the production and caused, seemingly strange, the water to lose all its oxygen, which would cause a fish kill because they had no oxygen. So we were asked to find exactly, to prove that it was the sewage treatment plant and then to tell them how they would need to change their operations. And this took a large group of scientists, many experiments and measurements from both the bay and work in the laboratory to find our answer. It took a couple of years. So we were not 100% sure of our answer, but we had done our best and we made our recommendation to the people who ran the sewage treatment plant, and they changed on the basis of our recommendation. Well, fortunately, the good news was that in the past 25 years since we made this recommendation, we have had no fish kills due to lack of oxygen in the water. So
30 seconds, Barbara.
okay, I've also been involved in climate science, and I would like to say a bit about that. If you have watched how, well, first of all, we've known about climate science and the basics of what causes warming of the earth since the 1860s. And we built upon that and built upon that, and many, many scientists have worked on it. And when we reported the results in the IPCC, as it's called, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate, each year they said, wow, we are more certain, and they expressed the degree of their certainty in their reports. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you to our speaker. With that, let us go for questions of curiosity to our previous speaker, John. John, do you wish to ask a question?
No, I'm sorry. I don't know why things keep happening like that. Sorry, I don't have a question.
Let's go to Mark.
Thank you. I'd like to thank the previous speaker, and I'd like to ask her to clarify, if she would please, some examples of contentious issues today that maybe the science isn't so mature on, that perhaps we scientists, I'm also a scientist, should perhaps be less dogmatic about, although some people make claims that their positions are backed by science. Could you give some examples of such contentious
Could the
topics?
speaker give? Could the speaker give some examples of less contentious topics? Thank you, Mark.
Yeah.
Um, huh. Some of the contentious topics have to do with diet and food, and those are the things that actually can aggravate me because I would like some certainty. It's, I think, because the human body is such a complex process. I mean, we're so complex, and studying it gives us just so many areas of uncertainty and things to keep looking at and keep looking at. We keep learning. And so, you know, it seems like one day they say, oh, well, you shouldn't eat certain kinds of fats. And then the next day they say, well, no, those were okay. I don't know what you were thinking of. I'm sure there's better examples.
What the questioner was thinking of, but thank you to our speaker. Well, no, we'll go for one more question. Let's go to Sherry.
Hi there. Yes, Madam Chair, I'm wondering, I know the speaker spoke about the 1860s. I've always wondered and heard something as a climate scientist she might be willing to comment on about something called the Little Ice Age. And I'm wondering if she knows anything about that and if that informs her thoughts on recent discussions around warming.
Perspective on the Little Ice Age to our speaker.
Well, yes, I have looked into that, and it seems strange that there could be a little ice age. Many scientists who are more expert in that area have looked into it carefully. I probably cannot speak on it without rereading what I've read because it is a complex topic. But there are good explanations of how there could be a little ice age that has now gone away. And I could refer you to wonderful discussions of that.
Please refer to the questioner. We're having a lot of use tonight. I do that.
Sorry.
No worries, no worries. Okay. And with that, the speaker and questioners are thanked. This is going to be a night where we're going to learn a little bit of science along with hearing the philosophy of science. So loving this so far. With that, I now am looking for, let's see, our next speech in the negative. For that, I am looking for Laura. Laura Scutch. Am I saying your name right, Laura?
Yes, Madam Chair, you are. Thank you so much.
Right, you have 4 minutes.
This is a huge topic and we have 4 minutes, so I'm going to go really fast. But thank you to all the other speakers. What I'm very concerned about and what a recent publication in the National Academy of Sciences, the title which said, "The entities enabling scientific fraud at scale are large, resilient, and growing rapidly." And this study was published in August 4th of 2025, reveals the existence of sophisticated large-scale networks involved in scientific fraud, including paper mills, brokers, and predatory journals. Now, the National Academy of Science was established in 1863 under Abraham Lincoln. It's an independent entity and advises the federal government on critical scientific issues of the moment, of the day. These entities that are the fraudulent paper mills and brokers facilitate the production and publication of fraudulent research, such as fabricated data, manipulated images, plagiarized content, and purchased authorship or citations. The study highlights that these fraudulent activities are growing faster than legitimate scientific publications, posing a serious threat to the credibility of science. Key findings include, and Madam Chair, I have to tell you that my internet said it was unstable and it happens about every 5 minutes, so hopefully I'll get through this without a freeze. Paper mills, organizations that produce low quality or fabricated research papers for sale, often allowing academics to purchase authorship slots brokers, intermediaries who connect fraudulent researchers with publishers, sometimes bribing journal editors to secure publication. Predatory journals that publish papers with little or no quality control, often for a fee, enabling the spread of fraudulent science. Scale and growth. The study estimates that fraudulent publications are outpacing legitimate ones, with networks invading interventions like journal de-indexing. The impact specific subfields such as microRNA research in cancer are particularly targeted, and the systemic nature of this fraud undermines trust in scientific literature. There's research by two authors from Northwestern University emphasize the need for scientific community to address these issues, to prevent the normalization of fraudulent behavior and preserve the integrity of science. Retraction Watch, which is an organization, says it's well over 13,000 retractions happened in 2024 alone. The National Academy of Sciences study notes that the networks like the Academic Research and Development Association has expanded significantly, producing thousands of papers annually. And there's an estimated something like 10,000 to 40,000 fraudulent papers annually at this point. So the key drivers here are publish or perish in academia when you are a professor. And AI can generate plausible content, and then as like a parasite, it will feed on itself. So it publishes and then quotes itself when people are doing research. This is a very, very huge problem that's happening at the moment. In 2022, Peter Doshi, the editor of the British Medical Journal, called for the immediate release of raw data during the COVID-19 vaccine trials. Pfizer refused to do so and actually wanted to wait 75 years to release that kind of data, which begs the question, why would they want to wait 75 years? There's estimated 8,000 predatory journals at this moment, producing 420,000 papers per year, nearly 1/5 of the annual scientific output, according to Scientific American.
30 seconds, Laura.
Time. All right, so that's all I can get in, but basically it's a huge problem and we need to address it.
With that, our speaker is thanked. And now I see hands lined up. Let us go to some new questioners. We'll go to James for a question of curiosity, please. James Hatchie, you want to unmute yourself? Do we have James? Going once?
Next.
Sorry. Okay, let's go to another one. Let's go to Bryson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to ask the speaker if, just based on the scientific article that she read from, if this is not an example of science working as intended to recommend processes and methods to improve its research and reduce bias.
I'm sorry, I don't quite understand the question.
Would the questioner care to rephrase?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm looking at this article on the National Library of Medicine, and isn't the fact that this article is being published proves that science is, that the scientific method is working to reduce bias and increase accuracy?
Well, I think this article isn't actually a research paper. It's an investigation into the amount of fraud that is happening at this moment, and that this is a very prestigious institution making a recommendation that something has to be done pretty quickly and pretty drastically, or we're going to have a very serious problem with fraud, as research bias. When people are trying to actually gather information through any kind of AI, say for instance, or any kind of database, it's going to be polluted by this problem. So that's what that paper was about, in my opinion.
And for one more question, let's go to Robin.
I just want to say the chat is still disabled, so we can't talk to our whips.
Oh, my team will take a look at that. Thank you for that. Okay. Well, then one more question for our speaker. Let's go to Anne Vargo. Anne, you are muted.
Yes, okay. Madam Chair, my question for the speaker is, given that we live in a time of huge misinformation, given the many ways that people can communicate and get information out there today, and because of AI, does the speaker feel that this is in part due to the digital revolution, and that this is something that, we need to somehow manage, as we have to manage other aspects of what technology has done to us?
Question?
The question is it worse now because
Understood.
of the digital revolution?
To our speaker.
To our speaker.
I do believe that's true, and especially because this will be so easy to access. All of these journals are probably not paper journals that are being proliferated. They are probably digital. So it's very easy to set up a digital journal and to publish quote unquote peer-reviewed science. And I think that there's a pressure to publish, and that is an academic career pressure, but there's also a pressure to produce results that are sought after if you are a contractor doing that work by the government or by industry. So there's this pressure to produce what is expected of you. And so therefore this fraudulent industry has grown to fulfill that need. And so yes, there has to be some kind of, I don't know how to do it, I'm not a scientist, but there has to be some kind of getting back to basics, I think, in some way.
Thank
And
you.
with that, our speaker and our questioners are thanked. We now return to the affirmative. And for our next speech in the affirmative, I am looking for Marty Hopkins. Marty?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am an engineer and I'm speaking in the affirmative, but rather than saying trust the science, I'm instead going to suggest that we trust the scientific method. Unfortunately, the term trust the science has become so politicized that it's basically meaningless. So I'm going to propose trying something else. We're all entitled to our opinions, but our opinions often contain both kernels of truth and blind spots because our individual experiences typically don't reflect the whole story. The scientific method is the best tool we have to identify what is actually true. So what is the method? After an observation is made, a hypothesis is proposed to explain it. Experiments must then follow. If the results don't support what we first thought, the hypothesis has to be revised. When the data finally does agree, the information then undergoes the peer review process where people not involved in the original work get to consider whether everything is making sense. Only after surviving this process is it fair to say these are the facts. Now, it's important to recognize that this whole process, this whole approach goes against human nature. When our ancestors thought they saw a saber-toothed tiger in the bushes, they didn't do experiments, they just ran. And our more intellectually curious ancestors probably got eaten because they probably said things like, well, those bushes could be rustling for any number of reasons. And that is why we are so good at forming opinions quickly and less inclined to check them against the data. And we really hate it when someone suggests that we're wrong. We still have some caveman in us that just wants to see those idiots get eaten. But another important part of this is that new information sometimes emerges after the fact that challenges the accepted conclusion. This usually means that the science was incomplete rather than wrong. Not always, but usually. But our black and white instincts tell us to assume the worst. I've been asked, can't scientists be wrong or even dishonest? Well, of course, scientists are human. But like most people, the overwhelming majority are honest, hardworking people who try to apply the scientific method for society's benefit. Our guts serve us very well when tigers are the issue, but for complex policy questions, our black and white instincts create problems. The costs and benefits of policies are usually shared unequally and sometimes unfairly, so we have to weigh pros and cons and make trade-offs. That requires reliable information. Enter the scientific method. For example, how much did masking actually reduce the spread of COVID? What were the economic impacts of closing businesses and the negative effects on our children of closing schools? These things are measurable, and the scientific method excels at finding the answers. But agreeing on the facts is only the first step. COVID affected health, economics, and education of various groups differently. So what's the right balance? That is a question of fairness. Those questions are subjective and go beyond science. Agreeing on what is fair is the hard work of democracy. It requires open-mindedness, a spirit of generosity, and a willingness to compromise. Fight or flight isn't enough. But we still need to start with the facts. Trust the scientific method to provide them. By all means, ask for evidence and for explanations when you think you see a flaw. That's part of the process. But sometimes the process gives us answers that we don't like. Please accept that when it happens. And also be open to others questioning us. That's also part of the process. And I'm going to make a final appeal to my colleagues in the scientific community. We can be better public communicators. We need to figure out how to acknowledge people's concerns before just presenting data and numbers like we're used to doing with each other. Not everyone speaks our language. So trust the science. I would suggest we trust the scientific method. Thank you.
Thank you to our speaker. And now for questions of curiosity. Well, actually, the chair wishes to observe that if she had lived in that time, she probably would have been eaten by a saber-toothed tiger, and assumes many in this room would have been the same. Chair's prerogative making an observation. But now going to the questions of curiosity, let's go to Philip. Is that Philip? Philip R?
Yes, but it's April. We're both here. Sorry to mislead. Thank you to the speaker. I was thinking about the previous speaker's comments on the meta-science about predatory journals and concerns about scientists living up to the Mertonian values. Would the current speaker like to talk about how scientists are pushing against predatory journals and the considerations that they're engaging in to try to push against bad science?
I don't have enough expertise to say what is actually being done. I can say that the peer review process is critical, because we can always find something that says what we want to believe. We can always find a journal or an article or something like that. But when, and if 2 or 3% of the peer reviewers say, yeah, that's a good idea, I'm still skeptical. If 60, 70, 80% of the peer reviewers say, yeah, this makes a lot of sense, then I think we should trust that a little bit more. But the responsibility falls upon us too, to look for that rather than just looking for, confirmation bias is real. We look for that one reason to believe what we want to believe, and then we ignore everything else to the contrary. So that responsibility falls on us. We have to look at all the information rather than just looking for what we want to believe. Thank you.
And for one more question for our speaker, let's go to Joshua.
Yeah, hi. So, Madam Chair, I had another question. So the previous speaker mentioned basing your trust on the scientific method and not the science particularly. My question is, what do people who don't have direct access to the scientific method, especially in cases of widespread science like climate change, what do they do? What do the people who don't have access to the scientific method do?
To our speaker.
That is a good question. What we can look for are trusted messengers, people who don't have an agenda. If someone is going to make money by saying climate change is or isn't true, or it fits their political agenda, I tend to be skeptical at that. You want to look for people who have no personal interest in saying things that tends to be more honest. But unfortunately, when I was a kid, everyone trusted Walter Cronkite. He's not around anymore, so we have to kind of look for ourselves to assess who it is who's talking and who are we listening to and what is it that they're saying, and do they have a motive, an ulterior motive for saying what they're saying.
That our speaker and questioners are thanked for this essential overview of the scientific method. I love that when that comes up in this debate. And let's see where that goes from here. Trust and who has expertise. I wonder if we'll have speeches on that. Okay, we're now going to a speech in the negative. For that, I am looking for Alex Weissenfels. Alex.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd also like to thank the previous speaker because then I can skip my introduction with the scientific method. Oh, there we go. So many people use the word science to mean a collection of statements about physical reality that they learned in school. Where I come from, we use science to refer to the scientific method. And so we start when we have a hypothesis that we call a fact. Sorry, let me start that over. I'm not good at skipping things. When we're confident enough to rely on a hypothesis and call it a fact, we don't always agree on which hypotheses we're confident enough to rely on, and we don't always get it right. So science, when people say that, meaning the scientific community and their recorded knowledge, that community used to violently dismiss the idea of continental drift, which admittedly is difficult to test and usually doesn't affect our everyday lives aside from the occasional earthquake. Millikan's famous oil drop experiment to measure the charge of an electron gave a value that was slightly off, but subsequent scientists were too afraid to challenge it because they assumed their own experiments were wrong. Medical doctors used to scoff at germ theory and the idea of washing their hands because they believed diseases to be caused by miasmas and bodily humor imbalances. Many scientists are disinclined to publish results that aren't interesting or that might harm profits of corporate sponsors like tobacco companies. And there are study results that are ambiguous, but people have a vested interest in nailing them down on one side or another. I subscribe wholeheartedly to the scientific method, but at this time, I don't trust that human institutions will apply it competently or honestly. So what do we do about this? Well, conclusions based on the work of scientists must be challenged in order to keep scientists honest. We should always question the experts because what makes them experts is the ability to provide satisfactory answers to those questions. Now, we do need to have enough basic understanding to judge those answers, but we shouldn't have to be an expert in a scientific field in order to recognize the limits of an experimental design and decide whether we're willing to draw the same conclusions from it. Here's where it gets interesting. When you tell someone, this is a fact, trust the science or trust these scientists, what you're saying is, this evidence is good enough for me to rely on this assumption, so it ought to be good enough for you. You're asking them to take a risk on what can and can't happen in the future. It's a fact that the safety features on the Titanic make it unsinkable. Or on the other side, this product is known to the state of California to cause cancer. Facts are assumptions, and assumptions are risks. And some of them are pretty safe. Life is full of risks we take every day without worrying about them. We drive cars, we eat food, we sleep in buildings, and those things usually don't hurt us. But some risks are less familiar. Not everyone is willing to take the same risks. Some people have more to lose. A person with $10,000 may be less willing to risk losing $1,000 than a person with $100,000. People are in different positions, they face different risks. They're not in the same boat, so to speak. So to address the risks that we face, we need to be constructive. Throwing numbers at people isn't as persuasive as it seems like it ought to be. Sometimes we need to dig deeper into the scientific process. If 2% of everyone who climbs a particular mountain dies, I'm not climbing that mountain until I know what I need to do to make sure I'm not in that 2%. Sometimes we just need to lower the stakes by reducing the worst case scenario. You don't need to prove your car's tires are indestructible if you carry a spare. The Titanic doesn't need to be unsinkable if it has enough lifeboats. Addressing people's concerns like this takes a bit of extra effort, but it's much easier when you listen to their point of view and look for the risks that they see. Thank you.
Perfect timing. Thank you to our speaker. For questions of curiosity, let's go to HK.
Hi, I'm interested in this speaker, what he had to say, and also the previous speaker. And it seems like the main concern has to do with believing in the scientific method, and yet there's problems with the scientific method, such as, faulty research, this and that. But so my question to you is, how can we help people who don't understand the scientific method? So if we have a large
population of people who haven't yet graduated from high school or who did but have forgotten what they learned, what don't even know what a hypothesis is. If you have people out there that don't know how science is conducted, how can we help those people to understand what we mean by data and how we evaluate our data?
A question on scientific literacy.
Yes.
To our speaker.
That's a good question. In the long term, I do think that we should be working to increase scientific literacy across the board. In the short term, I would start by looking at where people's concerns come from. What are the experiences that inform how they believe the world works, and what are the negative consequences that they are most afraid of happening that affect the assumptions they are and aren't willing to make? Because it may be that they don't trust the motivations of the people conducting the experiments, or they don't trust the methodology. But by understanding their perspective more, we could find a methodology that would satisfy them, or we could find a way to set things up so that the question becomes less important.
And for one more question, let's go to Harrison.
Hello. Yeah, speaker, I appreciate your thoughtfulness in what you,
My thoughtfulness or
the speakers.
the speakers? Yes. So what would you like to ask?
And so my question is, I think the main point you're making is.
I'm not making any points, but the main point the speaker is making.
The speaker's point is to have verification of what has been thought to be a fact. And my question is, how do we as a society support that? Costs money to do that.
Investment in verification procedures. To our speaker.
Mm-hmm. Oh, so I think the chair actually used the magic word investment. That's another of the constructive principles, along with preparation, which deals with risk. We do have to decide what is important to spend money on. Things that matter very much to people might be worth spending a bit of extra money on, depending on how. We want to avoid bulldozing people because that destroys trust. The question is, how much is trust worth? How much money do we want to spend knowing to establish that we're willing to put people's concerns to rest, whether that means spending money on more studies or spending money making it so that even if something goes wrong, they will be protected. So it really depends on the issue. But as we start with the big ticket issues and the low hanging fruit, we can actually save money across the board as we build this trust. It'll become easier and easier to get more consensus around some of the farther reaching issues.
And with that, our speaker and questioners are thanked. And I just want to say to those of you who are not getting your questions asked, I am jotting names down when I see people who I don't call on. So I see you, and I want to make sure I get a variety of voices. So we are now returning to the affirmative. And for our next speech in the affirmative, I have lined up John Scheinman. We have John. John, I'm having a little trouble hearing you. Okay. Do you want to? Can others hear John okay? Is it just me? No? Okay, John, forgive me. We'll come back if you can try a different connection, but it's very hard to hear you. Okay. Let's go to Bryson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sorry if there are any internet issues. I'm currently on my phone because my other device was having complications. So just tell me if at any point I start roboting. So I think that people can mistrust science for a number of different reasons, and I think that a lot of those are very logical, but I think that fundamentally it usually comes down to misunderstandings or misinterpretations. Science as a method and as a system that we have implemented has measures to reduce bias and errors. Of course, it's not perfect because humans are not perfect, but it does still remain our greatest tool for determining what policies and lifestyle decisions to live by. It's been pointed out a number of different times, and I think fairly, that science has been wrong on a number of different issues throughout history. But from my perspective, this is not a reason to distrust science, but is in fact a reason for the opposite. The fact that science has systems and has methods to change over time as new evidence emerges is proof that the system is working as intended and that the data that it's producing is the most trustworthy thing that we have at hand. Think about it as in like a common social interaction. We wouldn't trust people who refuse to change their minds, and science has shown itself throughout history to be willing to change over and over and over again. Yes, people can be corrupt, and that can influence science in a number of different negative ways, but there are reasons, or there are ways that science has to reduce this. Journals and funding agencies require a lot of data and conflicts of interest to be disclosed at the start or at the release of the study. Peer review and independent committees will overlook different scientific research groups or researchers in order to minimize any conflicts or minimize bad faith and to catch bad errors. The denial of science rarely have these same safeguards. There's been a number of counter scientists or science deniers throughout history that have benefited immensely from financial incentives. Andrew Wakefield, Fred Singer, Joseph Mercola, Alex Jones, RFK have built fortunes on the denial of science, and they aren't alone. The fact that science has a system to reduce these flaws is important, and our world reflects its success. Of course, there have been times when science has been shifted in the wrong way by bad financial interests, but these have always course-corrected. Notably, once previous speaker mentioned tobacco companies, the very fact that we now know, and that science has proven over and over and over again through rigorous study, that tobacco is bad for us and that smoking is bad for us, proves that these corrective measures work. And these measures will only improve over time. A blanket denial of science is not going to improve our system or improve the methods that we use to reduce accuracy or reduce data. Whenever people say trust the science, I don't think that myself or any other individual would say that this means blindly trust the science. Asking questions is good. Asking questions is vital even. Any scientific mind would encourage the asking of questions, but the problem that people oftentimes face is that they always stop at asking questions. Instead of just, right. I'm sorry?
30 seconds.
Oh, sorry. Instead of just asking the question, you need to take the step beyond that to do the research. Scientists have built their entire lives off of researching one particular field. They have likely questioned the very things that you're questioning and have come to the same conclusions. It's important to look at the reasons why science has reached the conclusions that it has. I'll give up the rest of my time, I guess.
That was perfect timing. Thank you to our speaker. And now for questions of curiosity. You guys are doing a great job not asking speeches in your questions tonight, just to say to everybody. So let's keep that rolling. And Heidi, unmute and ask your question to me.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to thank the speaker for his discussion of access to resources and take that a little further. How do we course correct when the allocation of research funding is unequal? That some scientific questions are able to be asked because they are funded and others are not. And I'll use as an example that there's a significant amount more of research that's been done on cancers that affect men than on cancers that affect women. Thank you.
You are a speaker.
No, that's a fantastic question. I really wish that there was a really satisfying answer to this question. The best that I can really do is that scientific funding is, scientists will come up with a proposal or will come up with a question or come up with something that needs to be researched, and they will bring it to a number of different scientific institutions or the government, and they will request funding, and the funding will be distributed based on the government's prioritization. This can lead to some topics or some questions going unasked when they should be asked. So the biggest thing you could probably do is to vote for and support and get people in positions where they can actually make those decisions, and get your voice heard. Really is probably the most significant thing. That's the only way that the questions that you need answering will get answered, I think.
The chair appreciates that she should do those things as well. So no, that works. For one more question of curiosity, let's go to our earlier speaker, Laura.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The speaker mentioned, and I didn't quite catch what he was saying exactly, but I heard Joseph Mercola and Robert Kennedy Jr. as being less than scientifically based in their assumptions. Upon what evidence, what source do you use for that opinion, actually? Where do you find that opinion?
Does the speaker?
Yes. Does he, on what source does he?
I'm sorry, I mean, where does the speaker find that opinion? What is their resource? Thank you.
So talking about RFK specifically, since he's probably the more well-known of the two, RFK is a notorious vaccine denier. He uses a bunch of sources that have been discredited and a bunch of names and researchers that have been discredited, such as Andrew Wakefield, which is another name that I named. They peddle overtly contra science theories that have been discredited. A lot of these individuals have been benign for their conflicts of interest. RFK, the point that I was making more generally was that these individuals are financially based. Usually RFK, for example, receives a certain amount of funding for court cases that go in the opposite of the vaccine company's favor, which is an obvious conflict of interest. And my understanding is that even as the Health and Human Services Director, he has not ceased these fundings.
And with that, our speaker and questioners are thanked. All right, we are now going to a speech in the negative. And for that, I will look for Jennifer Hobbs. Do I have Jennifer?
Yes, Madam Chair, thank you. So I had some things already written, but most of that has already come up. So for a little bit of context background, I now have left the classroom, but I was teaching public high school science. So when I say that I don't like the phrase trust the science, like I'm coming at it from this educator perspective. Some points have already come up, whether in questions or within speeches tonight, that science is our approach to like exploring the world around us, to understanding everything, whether that's just the general curiosity that we have because we're humans, or if it's we have a real problem, like the earlier speaker was talking about trying to find the cause of fish kills. Like that was a serious problem that needed investigation. One issue that we see in trying to trust the science, when I first heard it, the initial resolution of trust the science, I immediately was like, well, yeah, duh. But then by the time I had typed in my name to register for this debate tonight, I like immediately was like, wait, no, this is a terrible idea to just, I know we're saying we don't say that we blindly trust the science, but that's exactly what you're saying. I think about women who would like, because they express a certain feeling or emotion, were getting lobotomized because the scientists of the day said that was what you do, that there was something wrong. So to simply say trust the science does send a message to people at every level, whether it's our young children or it's the educated and the uneducated adults. You're sending that message of whoever the experts in that field are, you need to listen to them. Even if it doesn't quite feel right, just trust them. And that's a bad precedent to set. one of the things that we came to do, like within education years ago, they actually stopped teaching the scientific method. So they had the next generation science standards, which came out in 2013. So we're over a decade now into these standards. And it took a long time for science educators who'd been in the practice for a while to really let that one go. So you'll still hear every now and again it come up. While scientific method is great for teaching experimental design, not everything that we study with science can be done with and through experimentation. So like points being brought up with archaeology. This is why archaeologists have to revise that story. They're in critical mass right now because of data that has come up that contradicts the story, the narrative that we've been pushing for I don't even know how many generations now. Same thing that we see with plate tectonics theory, which people still call the continental drift theory, which the continents don't drift, but you have plate tectonics in motion that gives this appearance of continents drifting. And we didn't discover these things through the scientific method. We discovered these things by collecting all this data and slowly over time piecing it together. Right now, we are still in the throes of the backlash isn't the word for it. I'm struggling to find the word for it. But when we had scientists who were all trying to make names for themselves, so you had the chemists wouldn't share their data with the physicists, and you had the doctors not sharing their data with the geologists, like we had all this data just sitting there getting unused. And it's only been in more recent decades where we're like, you know what, we need to bring these branches of science back together, share the data. So we're really still.
Jennifer?
Oh, yeah, sorry. Thank you.
Are that ready for questions? Okay.
Yes, thank you.
All right. Let's go for our first question of curiosity to Bernard.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. I wonder if the speaker would address what I sense was a criticism she was offering. That is, continental drift was replaced by plate tectonics, and she says it wasn't science that did that. What happened was we collected all of these data, and finally we decided it was plate tectonics rather than continental drift. Isn't that, in fact, a representation of a success by science, which was it continued to evaluate a theory that was prevalent and realized that there was a more fundamental explanation of it? So wasn't that example that you cited as a kind of a reason not to trust science? In fact, science actually succeeded there. I'd appreciate a response to that. Thank you.
To our speaker.
Thank you. So to clarify, that is not an example of why you shouldn't trust science. It was more of an explanation of how the way we've previously taught science while telling people simultaneously just trust the science is we were using that cookie cutter method of the scientific method. And to teach it, you basically handed a recipe to a student. Here, this is this. So if you conduct this experiment, you will get this result. Don't believe me? Try it. Student then conducts the experiment as instructed. They get the exact same results. And the teacher goes, see, trust what I say. Trust the science. Whereas in that example of continental drift and plate tectonics, you have actual science in play. We didn't put this into a cookie cutter recipe and scientific method it out. We took the time of going through the full science process. And while those who've worked as scientists within scientific fields were trained to think of the scientific method in that sort of a way, that's not how it's taught to the general public who then do not go into the scientific fields. So today they teach the claim evidence process, which to see that difference, that shift from continental drift to plate tectonic theory, we can see it. Continental drift theory really didn't take off much at all because it lacked any for it. It was only because evidence started to build that continental drift came back in and scientists were able to say, oh, here's what's really going on. I hope that answered the question.
And for one more question of curiosity, let's go back to Jim.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to ask the speaker whether she believes that women are still being lobotomized today, and if they are not still being lobotomized today, why are they not being lobotomized today? And also with the scientific method.
One question, if you
Okay.
please, to our speaker.
Thank you. So in the ways that it was done previously, absolutely not. Are there still surgeries conducted that have any background with it? With lobotomies, you see it particularly like in emergency situations where you have the swelling of the brain and you have to relieve pressure. So you still get that, but it's not targeted specifically at people because they are behaving in a way that society deems inappropriate. Now, if we want to get into metaphoricals of lobotomizing women, then that's a whole other conversation that I don't think fits within this particular debate. But I'd be happy to discuss that another time.
And with that, our speaker and our questioners are thanked. And in terms of discussing things another time, in person, we get to mingle afterward. We would love to come up with a way to have all of you guys mingle afterward to continue these discussions. Alas, for now, we must move on. And so for that, I am looking now for another speech in the affirmative. John Scheinman, if you think your connection is better, we'll give you another shot.
Do you hear me now?
Yes, we can. John, you have 4
That's
minutes.
good. Just plug it in. Madam Chairman, thank you for the opportunity. I'm speaking in the affirmative to trust the science as long as one understands what the weird means. Now, the scientific method, of course, is a design for making an experiment in which you can actually develop a certain confidence in the results by biostatistical methods that are well studied. But the vast majority of things that we refer to as the science are not so cut and dried. And I wanted to give an example in medicine, where we were in 1910. The Flexner Commission was set out about the United States with funding from the Rockefellers to find out what American medicine was like and how can we make it better. And after 5 years or so, they came back with an answer and they said, well, American medicine so much resembles an apprenticeship that it can't really be developed as well as it should be. What was required is the professional teacher. And that means that if a physician learns everything they're going to as an apprentice, you'd have one physician following another around for maybe 2 or 3 years, which is the way life worked, and you would learn no more than what that initial physician knew. If, on the other hand, you learn your medicine from a person who is devoted full time to evaluating by as best possible the science that exists, and then is working on a vast variety of patients, at least the perspective is going to be greater and medicine developed. And that's exactly what happened. So that 150 medical schools went out of business in between 1915 and 20. And the others that remained considered their mission to have full-time professional people doing the science and conveying it to the students. So the difference between anecdote, which is I saw a case recently, and we've compared 2,000 of these patients with 2,000 of the others and find by statistical analysis, the chances are 95% that this is the way it is, as opposed to some other way, which we will ask next week and do the experiment differently. So basically, I was just trying to bring into focus why the science of medicine, which developed so long ago, was exactly based on the need for devoting the effort to the process rather than the anecdote. And that's all I wanted to say, because medicine is drifting backwards now. I'm sorry to say.
With that, our speaker is thanked, and we will now go to questions of curiosity. Let's go to Debbie Silverman, Dr. Debbie Silverman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Is the speaker aware that the results of the Flexner report, I appreciate what the speaker said, but the overall result was to obliterate everything that related to natural or holistic medicine and to support only those things that were the quote, new scientific medicine, which was petroleum-based chemicals, the pharmaceutical industry. It literally heralded the end of holistic medicine and put people on the boards of directors of the med schools that only supported drug medicine. Were you aware of that? Was the speaker aware of that?
There you go. Over to our speaker.
No. The answer is I was not aware of that, and I need to look into that very carefully because it seems to me that the reliance upon medicines and business developed far later in the system. But it may be true, and but that does not mean that it was incorrect to rely more on the professional physician and the full-time teacher. And the Association of University Professors developed a course at the same time, which was to make certain that the educators of the physicians were treated with the academic freedom necessary to provide objective information. And those were the results of the Flexner report, but there's negative things I didn't know of, but I know that, of course, eliminating holistic medicine is a lousy thing to do, and certainly getting paid is bad, but that is not what resulted from the Flexner report, that as I understood it, it was that the physician should be a full-time teacher and researcher, and therefore to gather enough information to subject the student to a variety of information that they needed. And that's how medicine developed very well.
And for one more question, I have skipped over Elizabeth a few times, so let us come to Elizabeth for a question. You're muted, Elizabeth.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would like to ask to hear the speaker elaborate on why he said science is going backward. I'd like to hear more about that.
Oh, well, starting with when Medicare started to reimburse the medical schools for the teaching of students and residents, it became obvious that the more patients one saw, the more money you bring in. And the treatment then of the physician as a vendor of a product became much more important than the research efforts. And so the teaching became separated from the research, and the teachers were used for the most part as patient attractants. And that's what I believe has deteriorated in medicine, so that in fact the doctor is paid by the quantity of bodies that he sees rather than the quality of the student that results. And I regret to see that during my career in medicine, to see the degradation of the education process. And that's how I see it, but that's why I think it has gone backwards.
With that, our speaker and questioners are thanked. For a speech of the negative, we now go to Paul Norris. Paul, you have 4 minutes.
Yeah, when I saw this topic, I felt so passionate, and I still do. I just want to note, there's lots of underlying agreements that we've heard. Um, and I totally acknowledge and believe in the scientific method. I just think I have a little different cut of things that have already been said. And in particular, our resolution is trust the science, in which I am passionately in the negative. If the resolution were trust the scientific method, I would be passionately on the other side. But the simple truth is there's no such thing as pure science. Scientists are people with all the foibles that other people have, and sometimes even a little bit more of them. Science itself, the scientific method, thrives on humility and curiosity. However, many scientists are the exact opposite, arrogance and certainty. And again, this is human nature. Um, Another thing that I would point out is, it's not the 1600s anymore. A rich man cannot do, or a rich woman cannot do science independently. Science requires money. And as soon as you need money, you get politics. So science, sadly, in our day, is perhaps to some degree inherently interwoven with politics. Um, I would point out, we like to look back at the ignorance of people in the past. But guess what? We are prisoners of the culture of our time just as much as anybody else, any time that they lived. And I guarantee you that, 200 years from now, people will look back at us and say, how the hell could they believe that? I guarantee it. Of course, I won't be around to see it, but I am quite certain of that. There are very few things I'm certain of, but I'm pretty certain of that. I'd just like to add, there's really there's really no such thing as a scientific fact. Really, it's like level of certainty and things change. And I could go a lot into abuses that have taken place based on what people believed at some point in time. Of course, we imagine there's no such thing like that going on now. I seriously doubt that that's the case. So what else can I say? One of the favorite things that I ever hear when I moderate is somebody speaks up and says, I was trained as a scientist. How do you expect me to talk to these people who don't believe in facts? And, again, there it is, arrogance and certainty rather than humility and curiosity. Um, and, one last little thing I would point out is Buddhism has been around, for quite a few thousand years. And it's interesting to see how neuroscience seems to be converging on Buddhism and believing and understanding a lot of things that Buddhism has been saying for thousands of years. So I think, I'm still 30 seconds short, but happy to take questions.
The chair smiles upon people yielding their time that we can share with other people. So our speaker is thanked. And now let us go to, let's see, Kit. I don't think I've heard from you yet tonight.
Hello. Yes, I have not asked anything yet. I was just curious if the speaker could. I hadn't heard of this, so I'm very curious. If the speaker knows an example of neuroscience and Buddhism converging.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question, and I threw that in there at the last minute. So it's beginning, meditation. The benefits of meditation are are something that science is beginning to measure, although a lot of people took it way too far. And I think it's clear that meditation is actually not good for everybody. So maybe they took that too far, but in general, the benefits, the discovery of why deep breathing actually works, stimulating a nerve whose name will come to me later after I talk about this. I think Jesse even gave a talk about that at one point. So, and also just coming to understand identity and attachment to self. I think neuroscience is beginning to get there, or maybe kind of a combination of psychology and neuroscience.
And for one more question, let's go back to HK.
Hi, speaker. I have a question for you, and that is regarding, I'm hearing a lot of scientists saying don't trust science because not trusting science is part of the process of science. So I'm wondering, I mean, if a person, an ordinary person, has to decide, trust their faith versus science, can you speak a little bit to that?
I can't speak, but the speaker could speak.
Speaker, could you please speak to Could you please speak to that question of how to weigh faith versus science in making decisions about policies and things like that?
I say something I really believe in as a human being is to trust your own experience. And if people are telling you one thing and your experience tells you something different, I would say, absolutely trust your experience. And, there are like inconvenient studies, like showing that people who have, faith actually seem to be mentally more stable and better off than people who don't. Very inconvenient to a lot of ideologies. So I would say if you have faith, trust your faith.
And with that, our speaker and questioners are thanked. Now I see the time, and we have exactly 4 more speakers in our queue. We are going to shorten this just a bit. So let's see. I'm going to give each person in our queue 2 minutes, and we will do 1 brief question for each. So, Amaya, I'm looking for a speech in the affirmative. Do you have such a speech?
Madam Chair and dear science community today, thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'm a passionate scientist myself, an immunologist, PhD by training, and work in the pharmaceutical industry to help make medicines for people in need. And speaking on medicines, I will speak in the affirmative because I think you can agree with me that when you have a headache and take Advil or any other pill, you realize your headache goes away, and there's a scientific process that has been studied to target a specific pathway that leads to your symptoms improving, and you will feel the relief. So a clear example is right here that there's science improving quality of life, and that is based on scientific research. And I myself have been in the lab and pipetted multiple experiments. I can tell you that there are principles, guidelines, ethics, and a number of pieces that guide scientists to use the best methods to answer the questions at hand, run multiple experiments to come to a consensus and make the right conclusions that is then peer reviewed by others and hopefully shows in the reproducibility that the scientific approach and conclusion is valid. I think on the additional example of, sorry?
30 seconds.
Okay, so on the mistrust, of course, that is out there, the science has been historically misused. There were unethical experiments. I do emphasize that there are modern ethics, transparency, and regulations in place, and our mistrust should motivate more scientific engagement and not rejection to bring us together to advance and use technological advances to our best life of quality.
Thank you to our speaker. And because I can't do math and figure out how much time we need, we are not going to take questions. We are going to privilege speech. So we will now go in our lightning round to Sherry in the negative. Sherry, you have 2 minutes.
Oh boy, that's tough. Okay. So I think the real reason we're talking.
Is it mine?
Hello?
Yes.
Okay, someone said is it time. I think before COVID, 86% of people trusted science and 90% of science trusted people to have the right to question it. I think the elephant in the room is that COVID and the treatment by those very experts, scientists, et cetera, created a decline. Okay, trusting the science, it's like a logical fallacy, right? It's won by authority. We're intelligent people. We get the right to ask for the reasoning and evidence, and this was not happening. You know, Nobel scientists believed in eugenics. Someone mentioned that. Einstein said 100 people wrote a book trying to explain why his theory of relativity was wrong, right? Unfortunately, during COVID, there were so many scientific proclamations that were used as a cudgel, and they were actually known early on not to be true. And those scientists, or quote unquote scientists, sunk into their sunk cost fallacy, right? They knew that they'd been talking about something that wouldn't stop a virus, but they'd spent so much of their capital on being right, they couldn't let go of it. We can go through this. I know if you read David Zweig, you'll see it: 6-foot distancing, lockdowns, closing schools, stay inside, not believing in herd immunity, right? These were all ridiculous things that the scientists knew weren't right, but couldn't let go of. And science, unfortunately, took a really big hit. And that's super sad because, like I said, most of us believe in the scientific method. Most of us believe in wanting science to do the work it does. We just need to make sure that it's not used as a cudgel. My favorite quote is from King Julian in Madagascar, who said, "The science is so solid," when he was making a sacrifice to the volcano gods. Watch the movie and laugh. I'll say one more thing. Someone mentioned scientific literacy. Okay, some of you know that I work with kids going to college. And I don't know if you know, but the ACT just dropped the science section. What are we doing in education to ensure this? Why are we dumbing down our education? Science is really important. It's always questionable. It always has to be allowed to be questioned. And anyone who says they're the science is not a scientist. And I think we know who that was. So those are my thoughts.
And with that, our speaker is thanked. Finally, we get to the COVID pandemic, which of course was the origin of this. And now for our last two speakers, let us go for the affirmative. Mark Reimers. Do we have Mark?
Great. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm a brain scientist and mathematician at a big state university in the Midwest. I'd like to say I've heard many good examples of critical questioning and thinking from both sides of the debate today. I'd like to follow up two things. First, several speakers have distinguished between the process of attaining scientific knowledge, the so-called scientific method, and the kinds of authoritative political statements that some scientists make, often claiming the authority of science, but to the rest of the world, these seem pretty clearly to be motivated by ideology. And I have to say, we scientists are just human, like you and everyone else. We are not immune to social pressures, to conformity, to trying to perform for our audience. And as you know, our audience at the universities tends to lean one side of most political debates. Laura Skutch, the other thing I want to mention is Laura Skutch mentioned paper mills and the disturbing increase in fraud in science. That is truly disturbing. But let me say that nobody goes into science intending to do fraudulent research in order to make money or gain fame. There are many easier ways to become famous or to make money. Most students I meet who aim at a scientific career are idealists, but the conditions of work in a modern university conspire to erode that idealism.
30 seconds, Mark.
Do you remember Enron, the policy of rank and yank? That's not too different from the culture of research today. There's intense competition, fragile employment. Everyone's always looking, will they make it to the end of their grant before the experiment works? And so all of these strain your commitment to the truth, and sometimes people lose that. We're just human. Thanks.
Perfect timing. And with that, our speaker is thanked. And we go on to our final speaker of the night, speaking in the negative, excuse me. Let's go to Debbie Silverman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have loved all the exchange of ideas from everyone, and I actually agree with most of them. And there's one major factor that has been overlooked in this conversation, and that is we can't trust the science when inconvenient truths are censored and silenced. part of the problem is you're hearing one side, and if we're not getting the other side, all you hear is that, and you think, wow, that's it. But consensus does not equal factual truth. Dr. Brian Hooker was a PhD who was contacted by CDC whistleblower William Thompson, who couldn't sleep at night because he saw that his committee was manipulating data when it showed that there was an association between autism and vaccines. They even sent it to a European statistician to try and bury it, and they couldn't. But the biggest thing came out this week in a Senate hearing that was going to reveal the largest vaccinated versus unvaccinated birth cohort study in American history that has never been done. It was conducted at the Henry Ford Health System in Detroit. It quietly tracked 18,000 plus children from birth over 10 years, and the data wasn't released. This group was pro-vaccine, and they intended to prove the benefits of vaccination. And what happened was the total opposite. 453% more neurodevelopmental disorders in the vaccinated kids. The problem is they're hiding the data they don't want the public to know. Follow the money. There are a lot more examples of data that's been hidden so that all you hear is what they want you to hear. That promotes vaccines. A lot of people got rich off that. And I guess on both sides, people are making money. But remember that consensus, even if it's 98%, that doesn't mean it's factual if a lot of other facts have been buried.
And with that, our final speaker and all of our speakers tonight are thanked. Now, seeing the lateness of the hour and all of the things we want to share with you coming up, I am looking for a motion to adjourn. Do I have such a motion? I see hands raised. I will take that as such a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
I second the motion.
Thank you very much. With that, I call this debate out of order. You may now refer to people by their names. The pronoun you is back in play, but please do not leave because we have the most important part of the night, which is our debrief. And so this is not the time to give a speech, nor to ask a question of a previous speaker. I would like to know about the experience of this debate. So if you'd like to share, what did you learn? What did you enjoy? What is something you will take away from this conversation tonight? So for that, let's go to Bernard. If you want to unmute.
Yes, thank you. I'm a scientist, think strongly in the affirmative on this particular resolution. I was struck by how many of those who had a negative view about the resolution said things that reinforced my own sense of trust in science. That is science, in fact, is always tentative, is always subject to improvement. It is always subject to change. And some of the negative commenters, interestingly, pointed this out as a defect in the science, when in fact, it is a fundamental part of scientific research. Thank you.
Thank you, Bernard. Things that we'll take away tonight that you learned or enjoyed. Let's go to people who haven't spoken. I will start with Leslie.
Hello, everyone. Great conversation. I have a lot of the reason I listen to these things at Behavioral Angels. I'm also listening to a podcast called Why Should I Trust You? Trying to understand why people who don't trust science, where that lies. And so what I am hearing is that there does seem to be a feeling that there's a way for data to be suppressed, censored, buried, which helps me understand why people are rejecting some kinds of science.
This
I
is
actually don't think that's
sort of like a speech, but I appreciate the thought. So yeah, so you learned from filling in some of those voices that you're hearing on that podcast.
Yes.
I love it. That podcast, one of our speakers, Machik Boni, was talking about that last week. So in the panel with Wilk. So thank you for sharing that. I love it when we can enrich the sorts of things you are hearing on podcasts. Let's go, Sam. What did you learn? What did you enjoy?
Well, I really enjoyed the questions tonight. I think we had some
exceptionally curious people in the audience, people who wouldn't have made it if they were back and wondering what was ruffling around in the bushes, if to call back to someone's speeches from before. But I will be taking away a deeper appreciation for the serious damage that was done and can be done when institutions of science and of the scientific method violate people's trust.
Thank you, Sam. Let's go to Jet, one of our regulars. What did you learn? What did you enjoy?
I actually did not enjoy as much because everybody went on and on too much. To me, it's very simple. If it's science, it's a pure science, I truly believe, like law of gravity or Newton's law of physics. Mathematically, it's simple, it's done. That's how we got to the moon and come back. However,
Jet, this is like a speech.
However, if it is a climate change, which says it is a consensus, that's not a science.
Okay.
Science is mathematical equation. That's that simple. Thank you.
Thanks, Jet. I appreciate that frank assessment of today's conversation. I will take one more. Let's go to Lawrence. What did you learn? What will you take away from tonight?
Takeaways, and some of this I've been thinking about before, of course, but one of the problems we have is scientists aren't very good at communicating. We're not really trained to talk outside the ivory tower, and there are considerable risks with doing that if your opinions are different from the rest of the people in your department or whatever. And the only way we're going to solve that is for scientists in universities, at least, to be expected to communicate once in a while outside, at least people in applied areas, and that be part of the promotion tenure process. The other side, many times it came up that people say the public doesn't understand science, and that's very true, and that's something we also need to address. The way scientists talk and the way public listens are very, very different, and we need to work on that in order to build that trust. And that came up, I don't know how many times. We need to build that trust by educating both sides to do this better, because clearly trust in science is declining, and that's an extraordinarily dangerous thing to have.
Thank you for those thoughts, Lawrence. Last week at Wilkes event, we were talking about science communication. MIT has a degree in that. That is not an easy thing to do, and a lot of scientists are more introverted, shall we say. So, yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed this debate. I always do. I find this topic in particular just is whenever I do it, I learn more things. This is, like I said, the third time I've done it. So thank you all for what you brought tonight.